A few years ago, I was talking to some compatriots about the 2015 film Ex Machina. They weren't friends because their insurance companies deemed them too high risk, so we couldn't keep that going. When we started talking about the ending, they revealed their tainted, polluted, evil souls to me. Some of them said that the ending left them perturbed, like Ava was out in the world ready to wreak havoc and sow chaos, and who knows what she's gonna get up to. At the time, I was an idealist who believed that you could reason with demons, so I said, I don't think we're supposed to read the ending that way. Ava's not the villain. And then everybody disagreed with me, and I went home and I paced around in my room plotting my revenge for 3 years. Here we are. Ex Machina is a 2015 film directed by Alex Garland. Caleb, a young tech boy working for a social media company called Blue Book, is selected seemingly at random to visit the company owner's mansion. When he gets there, Nathan, the owner guy, tells him that he wants him to perform a Turing test on his new AI creation, Ava, to evaluate whether or not she's sentient. Caleb develops an infatuation for Ava and hatches a foolproof escape plan to get her out. Nathan eventually reveals that the lottery that Caleb won was fabricated. Ava's face was based on data collected from Caleb's porn profile, so he was always supposed to be chosen. Her personality was also built from Blue Book's metadata. Nathan's slave fembot Kyoko and Ava kind of kill Nathan. Ava escapes and she abandons Caleb in the house to die. Ostensibly, Ava has done a bad. She's left Caleb to die alone in this house and hope that somehow somebody might, on happenstance, stop by, break into this maximum security bunker, and rescue him. In all likelihood, he's going to starve to death, or asphyxiate. I don't know how the ventilation is in there. It's not canon. As my enemies said to me years ago, she left him to die a horrible death. But, hang on a second, we might be putting the cart before the horse here. Caleb and Ava are not the only people in the film. Before we talk about those two, let's talk about Nathan. During Caleb's helicopter trip to Nathan's house, we learn that the vast forest that he's been flying over is actually Nathan's estate. As Caleb walks through the entrance and deeper into Nathan's lair, the house itself seems to be transitioning from the forest into a high-technology bunker. These glass panes run into sheer rock like the house is emerging out of the landscape or being consumed by it. Where the human presence ends and where nature begins is hard to figure out. Later, when Caleb is deep in the bowels of the house, in all of its coldest, most synthetic houseness, there are still small enclosures of trees, little boxes clearly relegated to nature, wherever the cyborgs are. Tiny forests within a house within a forest, like a Matryoshka doll of nature and not nature. Rich people's houses in the 21st century are often laid out and designed to look like nobody actually lives there. You know how your house, you pleb, probably has some sort of decor that also serves a practical function? Like, you might have vases that hold pens, and you might have other things that show off your interest to guests or exhibit the babies that you're friends with. Maybe your furniture is comprised of mostly mismatched hand-me-downs, and you have succulents scattered about the windowsills just to signal to people that you're a millennial. Imagine how much less of an impact this scene would have if Nathan's house was covered in Precious Moments tchotchkes and potted aloe vera. Nathan's house being such an exuberant display of wealth changes his presence, his little pocket of humanity in the forest, from being one of just humanity to one that's extra human. By contrast, the forest seems hypernatural. The greens are a little too green compared to the frigid metallic lifelessness of Nathan's toilette. Focusing on the setting is actually important if we want to understand Nathan's character. His property is Edenic, and the resultant human presence that he creates is uncanny. It's just familiar enough that we can recognize it for what it is, but it's also distant enough from most viewers that it seems more like a lab than a home.
There's a reason there are no windows in this room.
There is?
Uh-huh. This building isn't a house. It's a research facility.
In the tradition of God in Bible chapter Genesis, Nathan sequesters himself in a little pocket of the world and starts to develop a new form of life. Although God never really, sequestered himself. Does it show that I'm very ignorant? The film's setting is allegorical, and it encourages comparison between Nathan creating Ava and God creating Eve, and also forces us to think of the story within the context of that creation myth. Jean Alvares and Patricia Salzman-Mitchell point out that Nathan bears resemblance to many other famous figures in fiction. Zeus creates Athena and gets KO'd because he underestimates girl power. Nathan creates Ava to the same end. They also point out that Nathan shares the same last name with the protagonist of American Psycho, and he's got that whole Bluebeard thing going on with his storeroom full of mutilated bodies of women. Being rich, godlike, and misogynistic in Ex Machina doesn't seem to be a good thing then. And you can discern Nathan's powerful, demented hot messiness from the language of the film itself. In this shot, after Caleb's first session with Ava, Nathan's cast in shadow while Caleb is situated on the lighter half of the frame. Between them, there's a visible spectrum from light to dark. I think we just solved the crime. Cut and dried diagnosis of toxic chadicity. Prognosis is death. In an interview with some magazine that I made note of to try to find the name for, and I just fucking didn't, Oscar Isaac, who played Nathan, said that if anyone were to be the villain, Nathan is clearly the most deranged. Back in the day, this article felt like the winningest trophy for me. Look at this! Isaac says that Ava's not the villain. Take that, freaks! Resurrection of the author. However, he doesn't out and out declare Nathan to be the villain either. He argues that Nathan is just an instrument for the next big thing. Yeah, Nathan does a lot of terrible stuff and he's super mean. However, allusions to gods and bloodthirsty gentry aside, Nathan didn't start the fire. It's always been burning since the world's been turning. Nathan's role is mainly to help set things in motion, but his folly is in believing that he's a god. As yet another instrument in the grander trajectory of sentient evolution, can we really say that beefy boy Nathan is the villain? No. I just fucking picked a hangout, and now I'm gonna have to put a Band-Aid on. It's so hard to be me. Okay, let's comfort soft boy Caleb. Caleb is the first principal character that we see on screen. That means he's the hero, right? In this introductory shot where he wins the prize, a bunch of ladies gather around him for applause with their heads outside of the frame. Caleb's male colleagues look on from afar. Caleb, furthermore, is testing Ava. We come to meet her and learn about her through Caleb's interactions with her. And he's clearly a nice boy. He just wanted to save Ava. So when she locks him up, she's a total jerk. Conan the Barbarian, case bloated. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, underground success, you've probably never heard of it, was inspired by the story of Prometheus from Greek mythology, Prometheus being the titan who stole fire from the gods for the humans that he created. Frankenstein is popularly known as a sort of cautionary tale against unchecked scientific ambition that highlights the ethics behind advancing scientific technology. If you read the book though, you'll notice that the monster himself isn't a sign that we need to be cautious with science. He's not even born a monster, really. He's born a frickin' sweetie pie. He only becomes a vengeful, dangerous monster after people treat him like crap, and this is why he gets a chance to tell his side of things. What the monster does is learned, so when he explains where he learned how to do these things, our horror as the readers lies in the realization of the truth. Humanity is the real monster. Science, in undisciplined hands, leads to disaster. The book isn't saying that the ability to create life is inherently dangerous. It's saying that it's dangerous because we don't know what the fuck Frankenstein's gonna do to mess it up. So when Ava does this, and we ask what's wrong with her or what the dangers of AI are, we're actually missing the point. We have to think about who taught her that, and in whose hands AI becomes dangerous. Like, yeah, Caleb might be the least abrasive character, but it doesn't follow that he's uncomplicatedly good. Essay title: The Glass in Ex Machina tells you the real story. As Caleb walks into Nathan's house for the first time, he's separated from the camera by glass panes. He looks like he's contained, like a specimen on display for our observation. When he meets Nathan, window panes divide the two from each other into their own little boxes. Moments later, one of the frames divides Caleb bilaterally from the top of his skull. It's like a cross-section thingy from your biology class. Get ready to do a dissection of Caleb, everybody! It's gonna be fun! Finally, during all of his sessions with Ava, Caleb sits in a little observation room that we know is the outside of the cell. But these scenes are often shot from Ava's side of the glass, with Caleb looking like he's encased. Even when they're shot from Caleb's side, Ava's side looks like it's the exterior. It's more spacious, and there's visible plant life on her side. This inversion of the interior and the exterior reaches its pinnacle in Caleb's final scene. He's left in Nathan's peeping chamber, silenced and enclosed by the glass. Ava, meanwhile, walks free. Their roles have officially been reversed. Nathan reveals late into the film that the real test subject was Caleb all along, but if you've been paying attention to this motif, where Caleb is boxed in like a lectotype posted for study, it doesn't come as much of a surprise. Ava Session 7 isn't testing Ava, it's testing Caleb. Ava asks him one question on her way out. Will you stay here? And Caleb can't answer. he fails the test.
Ava. What happened?
Will you stay here?
Stay here.
So, the Turing test actually involves a questionnaire using a machine to ask questions of a man and a woman who are in a different room. The questionnaire has to figure out who's the man and who's the woman without seeing them face to face. But there's a catch. In this exercise, the man is replaced with a machine that has to masquerade as a man. The real test is whether or not the interrogator notices that one of the people they're communicating with isn't human. Danielle Wong of the University of British Columbia, represent... I'm not from BC, has this to say about the Turing test. Passing for human or successfully taking on human behavior is dependent on the machine's ability to deceive its human interrogator, a sign of artificial intelligence that is made analogous with gender performance. The AI has to convincingly act like a guy in order to pass the Turing test. When you watch this movie for the first time, it's so hard not to feel sorry for Caleb. His intentions feel so noble, but thinkle me this tinkle! The first time Caleb meets Ava, he isn't stricken with how wrong her imprisonment is. It's only after she starts to mean something to him that he really starts to hatch an escape plan. Ava was looking at living her whole life in a glass box until her erratic, capricious father figure decided to switch her off. She points out the double standard.
Do you think I might be switched off because I don't function as well as I'm supposed to?
Ava, I don't know the answer to your question. It's not up to me.
Why is it up to anyone? Do you have people who test you and might switch you off?
No, I don't.
Then why do I?
Most of us, Caleb included, notice how human Ava is from the moment that we see her, but Caleb isn't disturbed by her captivity until he starts to see her as a sexy prospect. A cyborg has to point out to Caleb the inhumanity of keeping her locked up. He might have realized the inhumanity in keeping Kayla. Fuck! Keeps happening. If Caleb was more empathetic or more human, he might have realized how grotesque Nathan's operation was before he found the closet full of dismembered fembots. Caleb's first failure is when he tacitly condones Ava's situation, and this is the moment where we, the interrogators, the questionnaires, start to understand who the real non-human in the room is. And that's the reason, Christy, that you are fucking weird for thinking the things you thought, because what Ava does to Caleb is the exact same fucking thing that Caleb did to her in the beginning of the film. Caleb's positioning in and around glass serves a dual purpose. The first being that it foreshadows his ending. Secondly, it reminds us that there's something about him that we're supposed to be critical of. And since he's the dude in this here Turing test, I think that we're supposed to be considering his humanity in relation to his gender performance. To a certain extent, that's obvious. Like, Caleb cuts his skin open at one point to try to confirm his own humanity, but I think more about the hints that are scattered throughout the film itself that encourage us to question Caleb's humanity and his ability to operate as a human in the world. Here, we can see the reverse of that light spectrum that we saw earlier in the film. This time, Caleb stands on the darker half of the shot, while Nathan is positioned in the lighter half. They actually switch places again in this scene, giving us further indication that their roles in the story aren't really cut and dry. Caleb also struggles to field Ava's questions regularly. Session 7 isn't an outlier.
Can we stop the test? You're a walking lie detector, and I just realized this is a fucking minefield.
No, we can't stop. Are you a good person?
Yeah, I think so.
Furthermore, the scene where Nathan starts coitusing with Kyoko is cut with footage of Caleb's fantasy of kissing Ava. This suggests that the way that Nathan views Kyoko and the way that Caleb views Ava are the same. That may seem surprising because Nathan is so Nathan and Caleb is such a nice guy, rights reserved. While the pairs seem drastically different, throughout the whole film they're just conducting a pissing contest to see who the baddest boy is.
My real question was, did you give her sexuality as a diversion tactic?
I don't follow.
Like a stage magician with a hot assistant.
So a hot robot who clouds your ability to judge your AI?
Exactly. So, did you program her to flirt with me?
If I did, would that be cheating?
Oh yeah, Caleb, that's right. The only possible reason Ava could be flirting with you isn't because she has her own motivations or because she's interested in you. It's because she's a piece in Nathan's 15D game of chess. Isn't it fascinating that when Ava flirts with Caleb, his first thought is that she's manipulating him and not, like, maybe she enjoys the conversation she's having with him, or that if this is something that she's doing to manipulate him, it might be because it's the only option she has available to her. The highest degree of agency that Caleb and Nathan allow Ava, and even Kyoko, is equivalent to that of objects in a game that they're playing. This is the attitude that leads to their undoing. Meanwhile, every interaction Caleb and Ava have is epilogued by a conversation with Nathan where they talk at length about Ava's vagina and her ability to have organisms.
But you want to remove the chance of her falling in love and fucking?
And in answer to your real question, you bet she can fuck.
What?
In between her legs, there's an opening with a concentration of sensors. You engage him in the right way, creates a pleasure response.
So, if you wanted to screw her, mechanically speaking, you could, and she'd enjoy it.
This is also why the closet scene is so striking. Caleb is coming face to face with the reality of the kinds of feelings that he's not honest or open about. Sure, Caleb's meek, but isn't he kind of participating in Nathan's Chad garbage? If Nathan's on the hyper-masculine end of that spectrum that we talked about earlier, did you hear my wrist click just now? Then Caleb is on the opposite end. He's a docile misogynist. His end is a poetic consequence of his actions. At the same time, that doesn't make him a villain. A character isn't made a villain just because they clumsily fail to abide by our moral axioms. Caleb has a robotic view of relationships, but that just ends up biting him in the butt. Villainy as a concept connotes some kind of intent, and if we talk about characters who have probably the most violent or malicious intent in this film, then Ava... Oh, Ava. In the scene where Ava dons the other cyborg's skin and dress, Ava walks by this painting by Gustav Klimt depicting Margaret Stoneborough Wittgenstein on her wedding day. You might know her brother, Ludwig Wittgenstein, famous for philosophizing about the mind. Oh my god. Now, if you knew about Wittgenstein before this, did you know that he had a sister? Did you know that she was like an expert in psychotherapy or something? I didn't, and when you try to look her up, most of the information that you find is based on her proximity to Ludwig and this portrait specifically by Klimt. Klimt himself was very interested in painting pictures of women's bodies that were highly erotic. Some feminists have argued that Klimt's work is objectifying because all of his subjects are painted like erotic, horny, half-naked people, and others have argued that there's actually some sort of emancipatory feminist potential in his work. All of his subjects are painted with this exultant energy, and he was willing to depict women who were pregnant as erotic, which is different from what most people were doing at the time. Margaret's legacy is derived from her relationships to other men. The most famous portrait of her is of the one on her wedding day, immortalizing the moment where she was gonna marry a man. And we also know her as the sister of a philosopher, but not so much as her own person. Ava, similarly, has thus far been the electro daughter of one guy and the prospective lover of another.
Don't talk. Just listen.
She's been stuck in a little box for her whole life, and on this day, the day of her own wedding, she breaks out of the box for the first time and wanders out into the garden. Visually comparing Ava to this representation of a real woman invites consideration of her movement here as breaking away from her passive involvement in dude stories. Just as she passes through the frame that cages Margaret, she escapes the enclosure of Nathan's house and the confines of being defined by other people's stories. The biblical origin of Ava's name is important here too, although the way that she bites the proverbial fruit and steps out into the world out of the garden isn't an indictment of women in general like it is with Eve. Instead of leaving paradise, Ava actually seems to be entering it. She steps out into the forest with an excited expression, and it seems like there's opportunity out there. Ava's story is best understood as a subversion of Eve's. The film questions some of the aspects that we take for granted about Eve's story, and it turns them on their heads. For instance, the age-old idea that women fucked up paradise and forced humanity to abandon innocence. Maybe paradise was never so good to begin with. Back to the glass! As you watch this film, take note of the amount of times that Ava is doubled by her reflection. This imagery suggests that her motivations are complicated, that there's more to her than really meets the eye. She's often seen facing her reflection, merging with it, or breaking with it. Here, Ava's multifaceted. Her intentions are clearly complicated, and the imagery here suggests that we might not be seeing her from the right angle. She's not like Eve, and she's not eternally damned like old Margie is over here. Her story and her future are a little bit more fluid. I do want to point out that it's bad that Ava left Caleb this way, and also Nathan being murdered was bad, but one of the things that made me uncomfortable when I was steeped in discourse about this film was the way that people tend to focus and almost isolate Ava's villainy while ignoring the ways that the treatment that she received from the guys ranged from exploitative to brutal. In that interview with Oscar Isaac that I was talking about earlier, Isaac actually had to correct the interviewer who seemed really insistent that Ava had done something that was particularly bad in the movie, and he had to reiterate that what she was doing was in self-defense. Everything awful that Ava does is either retaliatory or, in most cases, passive. The ironic part is that if you really wanted to make an argument about Ava being the villain, you would talk about the way that she treats Kyoko and Jade. It's unclear what Ava communicates to Kyoko before Nathan dies. It seems like she enlists Kyoko's help in defeating Nathan and then leaves her for dead. What happens next is, well, she also steals Jade's arm, and then peels her skin off to wear like a suit. Ava is the most literal whitewasher in the world. She takes a white dress from another white cyborg, so why does she take Jade's skin? This scene is one of the most interesting ones in the movie, and it sparked a ton of discussion that my film acquaintances apparently didn't have time for after saying wrong shit for like an hour. Danielle Wong points out that the attention to Asian women's skin in the film is significant. Wong argues that the moment where Kyoko peels the skin off her face to expose her cyberskeleton to Caleb, and the moment where Ava steals Jade's skin, call attention to racism and gesture to the West's influence on the popularization of plastic surgery in East Asia. Wong beautifully summarizes the dynamic between Jade, Ava, and Kyoko, and she says that Ava's freedom is made possible by Jade's continued imprisonment. I also really want us to think just for a second about Jasmine. Jasmine is the only black cyborg, and she's coincidentally the only one that doesn't get a face or a head. Wong talks about this in her essay, and it was another thing that I really wished I could have talked about with me old mates. There's a stereotype that black women are hypersexual and nothing else. To borrow the words from Kim over on For Harriet again,
what the masses primarily want to consume from black women, women who are not white, is our bodies and our sexualities. So most of the women that Lana Del Rey named in the first paragraph are still fighting to be messy and complex and contradictory whole people with thoughts and emotions in their music. Right? White women get to be whole people from the start. Black women get to be bodies.
This particular cyborg literally embodies the stereotype of black women as hypersexual. What's going on here? Ava is supposed to be the Eve of a new race of AI. Danielle Wong argues that while Ava walks forward into a new future, the histories of the other cyborgs are embedded in the skin she wears. Whitewashing doesn't end up erasing the presence of Asianness, Wong says. In fact, Kyoko and Jade haunt Ava as much as she might try to erase them. One and done. Ava's being haunted. Isn't she the villain? Here's my big reveal. There is no villain. I fooled you, fuckers. Something about the way Isaac worded Nathan's role in the film reminded me of an essay that I read a while ago, like a lover that you totally had sex with in the place where the sand is. Donna Haraway was a philosopher and biologist. I don't actually know if she's dead. She's alive. She is those things. She's famous for her 1985 essay, A Manifesto for Cyborgs, that ended up being really, really important in the fields of posthumanism and feminism. Haraway argued that 1, cyborgs could smash patriarchy, and 2, we're all cyborgs, so we can smash patriarchy. That's nice. Through the way that she looked at the human experience, some very powerful boundaries were being broken down and freeing us up to be something more. The first boundary was between the human and the animal. With the rise of animal activism and the proliferation of evolutionary biology, the legal and biological differences between humans and non-humans were becoming smaller and being reduced all the time. When I took a biology class in 2014, mushrooms were in the same clade as vertebrates. The next boundary was between machines and organisms. Machines now, by the 1980s being now, kind of have an autonomy of their own. And you know who used to have a monopoly on that? Organisms. If you think about it too, technology is the medium through which we interact with the world, from automatic bidets and everything else that makes life worth living during a pandemic. The final distinction was between physical and metaphysical things. Technology got to a point where it was very, very small, so small in fact that we need other machines to help us see it. Things like video cameras and highfalutin radios are, like Haraway says, nothing but signals. Think about this now in the context of 2020. Like, where is YouTube? Is it in their servers or is it in the air? Can you touch it? Is it a physics? Am I a physics? Are you a physics? If you hug your monitor, are you hugging me? Haraway was writing in the context where Blade Runner and Terminator, that's right, were still part of pop culture, and their legacies were inherited by other things that were like, you know, Ghost in the Shell, for instance, or Cyber 6, and now Ex Machina. Years ago, I wanted to make a video about Cyber 6 through the context of Haraway's essay, because, like, come on! Data 7 is Cyber 6's brother, and, like, he had his body transferred to a different body. It's a human animal machine. They're already cyborgs. And, like, the mind being transferred thing, like, where is he a physics? Tell me that, physics! Cyborg and AI stories highlight that if the human experience isn't as special as we thought it was, then maybe the ways that we describe or categorize the human experience aren't sufficient to explain all that we are. Are race and gender enough to really encapsulate who you are as an individual? Probably not, right? And that's just some of the stuff. That's just some of the stuff that we got. There are lots of problems with posthumanism, and particularly the way that it's implemented in media. The philosophy generally is inaccessible to like 90 billion people. If you're struggling to survive on the day-to-day, you don't really have time to be thinking about like expanding the realm of your conscious experience. I've read some posthumanist writers who have like been excited at the prospect of drones bombing people, and I don't think that they realize that if you have the luxury to think about like the boundaries of the human experience, you're probably gonna be a little bit more well off than some people who might also be human. Typically the people who have that luxury are white. This ends up bleeding over into the way that the post-human is represented, which is often just white. It's notable that in movies like Blade Runner or the more recent Gits remake, white cyborgs wander around these techno-orientalist, Asian-ish environments, and the Asian-coded cyborgs tend to be... This is something that Danielle Wong points out that Ex Machina addresses. To her, Ava embodies the whitewashing of the post-human experience and the post-human philosophy field. That aside, though, I love Haraway's essay. I think that it illustrates the power in the imaginary to completely blow open the way that we look at the world. What Haraway thought was so freeing about the cyborg and about us as we are is that these boundaries ultimately aren't powerful enough to keep us contained. As she says, why should our bodies end at skin? We are so much more than these categories. We are so much more than just human. Gits was a 1995 film about a cyborg who struggles to reconcile her identity as an individual with her identity as one in 1,000 identical models. In the end, she merges with a collective consciousness called the Puppet Master, and the film ends with a pan from them up to the city at large. She hasn't lost herself within this new form, but she's joined with many other things and become more. This shot implies that this new hybrid of many singular beings working as one has domain over the whole city. And maybe it's even part of the city itself. I'm telling you, shots of cities that look like cranial tissue, man, they're everywhere. I understand why I understand why people see this ending as ominous. What the AI decides to do next is uncertain. When I watch it though, I don't feel fear. I feel ominous. Like I'm bearing witness to something of such a grand and incomprehensible scale that all my focus is on it. It's boundless. Nothing can hold it back. Not even bandwidth, because it can walk. There's actually a reference to Gits in Ex Machina, and it's right here. This legless blonde cyborg looks identical to the Puppet Master's old body in Gits. The cyborgs in this universe are, much like the Kusanagi fusion, different than heroes or villains. Haraway argued that Western culture is full of dualisms, which high technology challenges in interesting ways. That's a quote, and I memorized it with my own frickin' brain. Actually, I'm Forgot the second half. It's not clear who makes and who is made in relation to humans and machines. I didn't script that either. I was really happy that I memorized a line. I really struggled with that. Moviegoers in the West really like to look for a bad guy and a good guy. People assume that the first person you see on screen is the protagonist. They assume that the most likable one is the one that we're supposed to agree with. And I think that we tend to also assume that whoever survives or succeeds wins an ideological argument. I don't think that really shakes with Ex Machina's milk. If anything, I think that Ex Machina highlights that we are not always honest about what makes us human, or what makes us. For better or for worse, Ava is an amalgamation of data that's collected by Blue Book. Much like the ending of Gits, I can understand why my old film buddies would look at Ava's shadow and feel foreboding. Her future doesn't have the same kind of clarity that Caleb's does. Who knows what Ava could do next? The first place that Ava wants to go when she escapes from Nathan's house is a traffic intersection.
Where would you go if you did go outside?
Not sure. Maybe a busy pedestrian and traffic intersection in a city.
A traffic intersection?
Is that a bad idea?
No, it wasn't what I was expecting.
A traffic intersection would provide a concentrated but shifting view of human life.
People watching.
The last shot that we see of Ava is there, at an intersection. We see many shadows overlapping on the sidewalk as people mill about. Hers blends with everyone else's at first, and it's hard to tell who the non-human is in the crowd. Everybody casts shadows, so in a way, couldn't we all be cyborgs? Like Nathan's estate is both highly technological and deeply natural, like sexuality is the result of nature and nurture, as Nathan says. Like Ava and like Caleb, this movie's morality can't be divided into easy binaries like good or bad, because binaries are dead! Sound the alarm! Call the newspaper! Hello, thank you for watching. Just so you know, you can follow me on Twitter. I don't know if I can link it here, but you can click somewhere. I have a Curious Cat account if you need to ask me any questions. And the next video is going to be about Blasphemous, because it's in that list that I gave a while ago at some point. So, wear sunscreen!